In 1971, three friends opened a small coffee bean shop in Seattle's Pike Place Market. They were not trying to build an empire. They were not trying to disrupt an industry. They were coffee enthusiasts who believed that Americans deserved better beans than the stale, pre-ground coffee that filled the supermarket shelves of the era. They named the shop after the first mate in Moby Dick. They called it Starbucks. For 11 years, Starbucks sold beans, not drinks, not lattes, not the caramel macchiatos that would eventually be ordered 400 million times a year. Just beans. Roasted, high-quality, carefully sourced coffee beans that serious coffee drinkers could take home and grind themselves. The shop was successful. The founders were happy. They had no intention of expanding. And then, in 1982, a young New York salesman named Howard Schultz walked into the store to sell them kitchen equipment and saw something the founders had completely missed. This is not a story about coffee. It never was. It is a story about what happens when someone walks into a room and sees the future so clearly that they are willing to risk everything they have, including the thing they love most, to build it. It is a story about vision, about obsession, about the specific kind of generosity that turns a product into a place, and a place into something that 2 billion people cannot imagine their morning without. And it is a story about a financial structure so elegant, so quietly powerful, that most of the people who fund it every single day have no idea they are doing it. This is the real Starbucks story. Howard Schultz grew up in a housing project in Brooklyn, New York. His father worked physical labor jobs his entire life: truck driver, factory worker, cab driver, and never once had health insurance, paid vacation, or any of the protections that most employed people take for granted. When Schultz was 7 years old, his father broke his ankle on a job site and lost his position immediately. No compensation, no support, no safety net of any kind. The family had nothing. Schultz has spoken about that moment his entire adult life, not with bitterness, with clarity. It gave him a conviction so deep that it would eventually shape every major decision he made as a business leader. He decided at 7 years old in a Brooklyn housing project that if he ever built something, the people who built it with him would never be left without a safety net. That decision, made by a child watching his father lose everything, is the inspiration at the center of the Starbucks story. And it is the part that most people who drink Starbucks every morning have never heard. In 1982, Schultz was working as a sales director for a Swedish kitchenware company. He noticed that a small coffee shop in Seattle was ordering an unusual number of drip coffee makers, far more than their size suggested they needed. He flew to Seattle to find out why. What he found was a store that understood coffee the way a sommelier understands wine. The founders, Jerry Baldwin, Zev Siegel, and Gordon Bowkert, were not retailers. They were educators. They talked about coffee with a passion and a knowledge that Schultz had never encountered. Customers came not just to buy beans, but to learn, to understand origin and roast and grind and brew. Schultz fell in love with it immediately. He quit his job in New York, took a significant pay cut, and joined Starbucks as director of marketing. His employers thought he was making a mistake. His colleagues thought he was making a mistake. His wife, who was pregnant with their first child, supported him anyway. 1 year later, Schultz went to Italy. In Milan and Verona, he experienced something that changed everything he thought he understood about coffee. The Italian espresso bar was not a place to buy a drink. It was a place to belong. Customers came every morning to the same bar, ordered from the same barista, stood at the same counter, and participated in a ritual that was as much about community as it was about caffeine. The barista knew their name, knew their order, knew something about their life. The bar was a third place, not home, not work, but a third place that anchored people in their daily existence and gave them a moment of warmth and connection in the middle of the ordinary grind of living. Schultz flew back to Seattle with one idea so clear it was almost physical. This is what Starbucks should be. Not a bean shop, a third place. A space between home and work where people could feel seen, known, and comfortable. where the coffee was excellent but almost secondary to the experience of being there. He presented the idea to the founders. They said no. This is the moment in the Starbucks story where most people stop and judge the founders harshly. They missed it. They couldn't see it. They held Schultz back. But here is the other side of that moment, the side that tells a more honest and more human story. The founders were not wrong to say no. They had built something they believed in, a specialized, quality-focused coffee bean business with a loyal customer base and a clear identity. Schultz was asking them to become something completely different, a cafe chain, an experience business, a concept that would require capital and risk and the abandonment of everything they had carefully built. They said no because they were protecting something real, and Schultz, to his credit, understood this. He did not resent them, he respected them, and then he went and built it anyway. In 1985, with $150,000 of his own money and $900,000 raised from local investors, many of whom also said no before eventually saying yes, Schultz opened his own coffee bar in Seattle. He called it Il Giornale after the Italian newspaper, because he wanted the name to evoke the daily ritual he had witnessed in Milan. The first store opened in April 1986. By the end of the first day, it had served over 300 customers. Within a year, Il Giornale had 2 locations and was generating enough revenue to prove the concept completely. Schultz had been right. Americans would pay more for a better experience. They would pay for comfort and community and a barista who knew their name. And then, in 1987, the founders of Starbucks decided to sell. They had never wanted to operate a chain. The original vision, a quality bean shop, an educator's business, a place for serious coffee, was still what they wanted. The growth was pulling them away from it. They were ready to exit. Schultz raised $3.8 million, bought the company, merged it with Il Giornale, and renamed everything Starbucks. He was 33 years old. He had just acquired 6 stores and a brand name. He had a vision so clear it kept him working 18-hour days, and a conviction so deep it made every risk feel necessary. What he did next is what turned a Seattle coffee company into the most visited retail location in American history. He hired people the way his father had never been hired. In 1988, 1 year after acquiring Starbucks, before the company had any obligation to do so, before any competitor had done it, before any investor had suggested it was a good idea, Schultz extended full health benefits to every Starbucks employee who worked more than 20 hours a week. Part-time baristas, people who poured coffee for a living, people whose fathers, like his own, might have broken an ankle on a job site and lost everything. The investors were furious. The analysts were confused. The business logic was, on the surface, unclear. Health benefits for part-time workers were expensive. They reduced margins, they complicated payroll. They were, by every conventional measure of business efficiency, unnecessary. Schultz implemented them anyway, because he understood something that the spreadsheets could not capture, that the person who hands you your coffee every morning is not a cost to be minimized. They are the product. They are the experience. They are the reason a customer chooses Starbucks instead of the coffee cart on the corner. And a person who is treated with dignity, who has health coverage, who has a future, who feels that the company they work for sees them as a human being rather than a labor unit. That person smiles differently when they write your name on a cup. That smile is worth more than the margin on a latte. By 1992, Starbucks had 165 stores. By the IPO in June of that year, the company was valued at $250 million. By the end of the first trading day, the stock had risen 25%. The third place concept had worked. The health benefits had worked. The barista knows your name model had worked. And now, the most sophisticated financial mechanism in the history of retail was about to be born. Not because anyone planned it, but because customers started asking for a more convenient way to pay. That mechanism would eventually hold more unspent money than most American banks, and almost no one who uses it every day understands what it actually is. That story is in part 2. What it actually is a bank. Not legally, not officially, but functionally, structurally, and financially, The Starbucks Rewards program is one of the most sophisticated money-holding operations ever built inside a retail company. Here is how it works. You load money onto your Starbucks card or app. The money leaves your bank account immediately. It sits inside Starbucks' possession, earning interest for Starbucks, available for Starbucks to invest and operate with, until the moment you decide to spend it on coffee. In 2022, Starbucks held $1.6 billion in unspent customer balances on its cards and app. $1.6 billion. Held by a coffee company, provided voluntarily by customers, interest-free, with no regulatory requirement to hold reserves against it, with no FDIC insurance protecting it, with no obligation to return it on any particular timeline. For comparison, there are more than 4,000 banks in the United States that hold less than $1.6 billion in deposits. Starbucks is, by this measure, larger than most American banks. And it achieved this without a banking license, without banking regulation, and without most of its customers understanding that loading their Starbucks card is, in every meaningful financial sense, making an interest-free loan to one of the most profitable companies in the world. This is not a criticism. It is an observation about the extraordinary sophistication of what Schultz and his team built, and about what it reveals when you understand how it actually functions. The loyalty program works because it is genuinely valuable to the customer. The stars accumulate, the free drinks arrive, the birthday reward feels personal, the app is convenient. The experience of being a Starbucks Rewards member is, for the people who use it, genuinely pleasant and genuinely useful. But the genius of the structure is that Starbucks wins at every step regardless of what the customer does. If you spend your balance, Starbucks sells you coffee at full margin, having already held your money interest-free for weeks or months. If you never spend your balance, Starbucks keeps the money. The industry term for this is breakage. In 2022, Starbucks recognized $196 million in breakage revenue, money that customers loaded onto cards and never spent. $196 million from people who paid for coffee they never drank. And if you spend your stars on a free drink, Starbucks gives you something worth $4 in exchange for the behavioral data, the visit, and the probability that you will buy something else while you are there. Every outcome serves Starbucks. Every outcome also genuinely serves the customer who uses the program intentionally. This is the mark of a truly exceptional business model, one where the incentives of the company and the customer are aligned well enough that both parties feel they are winning, even when the math strongly favors one side. Howard Schultz did not design this when he bought 6 stores in 1987. The loyalty program launched in 2009. By then, Schultz had already left the company once, watched it drift away from the values he had built it on, and come back to rescue it. In 2000, after 13 years of extraordinary growth, Schultz stepped down as CEO. He remained as chairman, but handed operational control to successors who focused on efficiency, scale, and the relentless addition of new products and store formats. By 2007, Starbucks had 15,000 stores worldwide. It was also quietly becoming a different place. The espresso machines had been changed to fully automatic models, faster, more consistent, but tall enough that the barista could no longer make eye contact with the customer while preparing the drink. The breakfast sandwiches that had been added to the menu were filling the stores with the smell of warm cheese, overwhelming the coffee aroma that had defined the experience for 30 years. The stores themselves had become more efficient and less comfortable, more transactional and less communal. The third place was becoming a fast food restaurant. In January 2008, Schultz sent a memo to the Starbucks board that has since become one of the most studied documents in the history of corporate turnarounds. He described with painful specificity what had been lost: the romance of the experience, the sounds of the espresso machine, the connection between barista and customer, the sense of discovery that had made walking into a Starbucks feel like entering somewhere that understood you. He was describing, with the grief of someone who had built the thing, what happens when a company optimizes for efficiency at the expense of identity. The board asked him to come back as CEO. He returned in January 2008. The same month, Starbucks stock had fallen 60% from its peak. The financial crisis was beginning. The company was in genuine danger. Schultz closed every Starbucks in the United States for one afternoon, all 7,100 stores. He brought the baristas back to the basics: how to pull an espresso shot properly, how to steam milk to the right temperature, how to make the drink the way it was meant to be made. The cost of closing 7,000 stores for an afternoon was approximately $6 million. The message it sent to the baristas, to the customers, to the market, was worth incalculably more. Schultz was saying with the most expensive training session in retail history that Starbucks was willing to lose $6 million in an afternoon to remember what it stood for. That is the second great lesson of the Starbucks story. And it is the inspiring one. The one that has nothing to do with loyalty programs or breakage revenue or unspent card balances. It is about the courage to stop, to close the doors, to say to the world and to your own organization, we have drifted from what we are and we are going back, whatever it costs. Most companies, when they drift, keep moving. The momentum of revenue and growth makes stopping feel impossible. The quarterly earnings call is in 3 weeks. The investors want consistency. The analysts want predictability. Nobody wants to be the CEO who closed 7,000 stores on a Tuesday afternoon to teach people how to make coffee. Schultz did it anyway. By 2012, Starbucks stock had recovered completely and surpassed its previous peak. By 2019, annual revenues exceeded $26 billion. By 2023, the company operated in 84 countries with 35,000 locations. The third place, battered, compromised, temporarily lost, had come back. Not identical to what it was. Nothing ever is. But recognizably itself. Recognizably the thing that Howard Schultz had seen in Milan in 1983 and spent 40 years trying to build in every city on Earth. There are 5 lessons inside the Starbucks story. And unlike the cautionary tales that often fill business histories, all 5 of them are worth learning because all 5 of them are genuinely inspiring. The first lesson is that vision requires stubbornness. Schultz was told no by the founders, no by investors, no by the conventional wisdom of the American restaurant industry. He built it anyway, not out of arrogance, out of certainty. There is a difference between the two that is difficult to articulate but impossible to miss in the people who actually build things. The second lesson is that how you treat people is a business strategy. The health benefits that Schultz extended to part-time baristas in 1988 were not charity. They were a bet. That dignity creates loyalty, and loyalty creates the kind of customer experience that no marketing budget can manufacture. The bet paid off in ways that 3 decades of compound growth make visible, but that no spreadsheet could have predicted in the year they were offered. The third lesson is that the product is never just the product. Starbucks does not sell coffee. It sells the feeling of being known, of belonging somewhere, of having a place that is yours in a city that can feel anonymous and indifferent. The coffee is excellent, but the coffee is not why 2 billion visits happen every year. The feeling is why. The fourth lesson is that drift is the enemy of identity. Every successful company eventually faces the pressure to optimize, to remove the inefficiencies that are actually the soul of the thing. The espresso machine that was too slow but created connection. The store design that was too expensive but felt like home. The barista interaction that took 30 seconds longer but made someone's morning. The companies that survive for generations are the ones that recognize drift before it becomes irreversible, and have leaders courageous enough to stop and go back. The fifth lesson is the most personal one. Howard Schultz grew up watching his father work without a safety net and lose everything when the net disappeared. He spent his adult life building a company that would never do that to the people who worked for it. He did not do this because it was required. He did not do it because an investor suggested it. He did it because a 7-year-old boy in a Brooklyn housing project made a decision about what kind of person he was going to be. And the man he became never forgot it. The most durable businesses in history are not built on strategy. They are built on conviction. on a belief so deep that it survives the bank rejections and the board disagreements and the stock price crashes and the Tuesday afternoons when you close 7,000 stores and ask your people to remember why they started. Howard Schultz started because he walked into a room in Seattle and saw something that made him feel, for the first time in his professional life, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. That feeling, one of being in the right place, building the right thing for the right reasons, is rarer than talent and more valuable than capital. It is what separates the people who build something lasting from the people who build something merely profitable. And it begins, always, not with a strategy document, or a market analysis, or a funding round. It begins with walking into a room and seeing something no one else has seen yet, and being stubborn enough to build it anyway. If this story changed how you see the cup in your hand, subscribe. The next Empire Files episode goes inside the most secretive luxury empire ever constructed. A family that controls brands worth hundreds of billions that every person watching this has encountered today without knowing who owns them. They have never given a press conference, never appeared on a rich list voluntarily, and the structure they built makes everything we have covered so far look simple. Stay silent, build quietly, and own everything you touch.